After I covered the Bluey infection AU, a bunch of you kept asking me to cover the Bluey Unbroken comic by a random human on YouTube, and I almost skipped this one, but I'm happy I didn't because it's very well done and it has an interesting twist. Now the comic wastes no time, and we start out with Chili in the car with her children because it seems like Bandit has become feral, although at this moment we don't know why. But when we get a look at him, he looks more like a large wolf than a cattle dog, and if you said that they're the same thing, you've never seen a wolf compared to a dog. After that, we also get this image of him kind of talking to himself, saying that he breathed in something and he misses his family. And then we see that someone else starts to speak to him, simply saying, "Hello, Bandit." And while that doesn't give us much to go on, we do learn two things. Bandit still seems to be conscious, even though he no longer seems to have control over his body. It almost feels like he's trapped inside himself, being forced to attack people against his will. And the voice that he keeps hearing may be whatever has taken over his body. Now after that, we cut back over to Chili and the children, and they have been driving for a while, and we can see that they are almost out of gas, and Chili is trying to play it cool so that her kids don't actually know that something is very wrong in this AU. And at this point, she's even managed to convince Bluey that her dad is just playing pretend right now. But it looks like she's finally ready to actually reveal what's really happening, but then something steps out onto the road, and it turns out to be Bluey's old babysitter, or aka her Uncle Radley. And it's obvious just by looking at him that he is not well. He doesn't look as vicious as Bandit did, but his extended mouth is kind of a dead giveaway. Now at this point, the children don't actually know that anything is wrong, but Chili obviously does, and she's trying to shield them from Uncle Rad. And for a moment, it looks like Rad is going to run them down, but then Uncle Stripes comes out of nowhere and smacks the heck out of him with a wrench. And for the people that may be confused to why Stripe is crying here, it's because Radley is his eldest brother. And that means that at this point, both of his older brothers have fallen victim to whatever this infection is. Next, we see that Chili is overjoyed to see Stripe, but more importantly, we learn that whatever is going on here, it is not an infection or a mutation, meaning that this is not going to be like your typical infection AU, even though it does seem like there is a virus going around. And while he leaves us on a bit of a cliffhanger, we at least get to learn that Trixie is also alive, which serves as summer leave for our crew. And before the group heads out, we get a look at Uncle Rad, and he is lying very still at this moment. And of course, Bluey is sad at the sight because she doesn't understand why they had to hurt her uncle. Because for her, he still just looks normal. Now after that, we cut back over to Bandit, who still seems to have some voice speaking to him. And he's also hallucinating because we know for sure that his family isn't there with him. And then we get confirmation when he goes to hug them and realize that this is more of a flashback. He actually tried to attack his family, and if they wouldn't have escaped, he would have had his own family's blood on his hands. We also get a brief scene on where he's kind of reminiscing on some of their memories, but then that voice cuts in and confirms that Bandit doesn't have any control over his body anymore. And the voice says, "All those memories are the only thing you have while you kill innocents and can't control yourself. Just watch them die." And honestly, this is far worse than your typical virus. Imagine if you had to watch your loved ones lose their lives only to realize that you are the one doing it and you cannot stop. This is a diabolical and at the same time a heartbreaking concept. The next scene is a bit lighter, and we get to see the group meet up with Aunt Trixie, and we also learn that Muffin and Socks are alive as well. And then we see the children go off to the playroom while Chili explains what had happened to Bandit. And then we learn that 1 minute Bandit was fine, but it looks like he ate some kind of red berries, and after that, he suddenly started to change. And while in real life, if animals eat certain berries that may be rotten or overly ripe, or even some of the poisonous berries that we have here in the US, they could become confused, scared, and even lash out at people. But I feel like something much darker is actually going on here, especially judging by Bandit's face. He doesn't look scared or confused, just violent. Now, after that little flashback, we learn how they figured out that there's no virus going around. Apparently, the government has been broadcasting on the radio and informing people that they have done testing and they have found no virus or infection in the sick animals. And while they don't give us a lot to go on, we do learn that whatever is happening is caused by something red and possibly something smoky. And my mind immediately goes back to the berries that we saw Bandit holding earlier. But the dogs in this AU don't really know what they're looking out for, so to be safe, they're just trying to avoid anything red and head to the closest military base so that they can actually be safe. And after the group gets a good night's sleep, they head out bright and early, determined to make their way to the military base. But as the group is walking, we see that Bingo starts to feel dizzy and asks for some food. And when Chili goes to fetch her something, she walks into a gruesome sight. By the looks of it, we have 3 puppies here that have been mauled, and if that wasn't bad enough, they realize that someone or something is watching them from the shadows. And we see that it's Snickers' mom. And while I would normally say that wiener dogs are not very scary, they managed to make this one look terrifying. The saddest part about this is that we see Snickers lying on the ground next to his mother, and while I would like to hope that she didn't attack her own child, we see Bluey run over to him and he is torn the heck up. And he confirms that his mother attacked him out of nowhere. And then we see this pair have a heartbreaking exchange where Snickers says, "Everything hurts. Every single thing hurts, Bluey. Am I gonna die? I'm scared to death. What happens when you die?" Then he has a moment where he thinks about his dad who was in the military, and this gives him a little bit of courage. And before he takes his last breath, he tells Bluey that she was an amazing friend, and then he quietly passes away with just a single tear rolling down his cheek. And this is by far one of the saddest deaths I've seen in any AU so far, so can we please get some rips for Snickers in the comments, please? After that scene, we see that Bluey is mourning the loss of her friend, but then another feral dog comes from behind her and tries to attack her. But they are able to actually get her out of the way and also put a bullet right between the dog's eyes. And for a moment, it looks like all will be okay with the group, but once they let their guard down, a dog sneaks up on Stripe and takes a huge bite out of his neck. And while the group is able to fight the dog off, it looks like Stripe is too weak to move, and he tells them that they will have to go on without him. And honestly, it was very touching to see that he was worried more about the safety of his family than his own life. And the group does end up honoring his wishes and they continue moving forward. But before the group can make it to safety, we see that Trixie faints. And while the group is fussing over her, the dogs from the military find them. And while most of the kids don't recognize any of these soldiers, Bluey immediately recognized one of the soldiers is Rusty's dad, which seems to put them at ease. The soldiers do still end up having to muzzle Trixie since they don't know why she passed out and can't risk her trying to bite somebody. And it also seems like they're going to be able to go back and get Uncle Stripe because they do mention that they found a survivor. So all in all, this first part has actually ended pretty well for the group, everything considered. Now, before we go on to part 2, I do want to point out that there's an additional video that the creator made where he shows what happened with Rusty and his mother, and also gives us a glimpse into how this all started.
Government officials urging citizens to stay indoors as a nationwide emergency has commenced. Please do not consume any red foods, as they contain a chemical that makes animals go feral.
And as we suspected, it seems like those red berries are probably the cause for the feral outbreak. Now, back in the animation, we see that Rusty is trying to hide from his mother. And while it looks like the dog is actually going to attack her child here, luckily the father is able to make it home in time to defend him. There's also an interesting moment where the wife tries to get the husband to join her, but he is able to resist her pull and forces her to retreat into the woods. But this does give us an idea of what was likely talking to Bandit in the first part of the series. It seems like once these dogs inhale or ingest those red berries, they get filled with a literal manifestation of rage, which is what I think the red dog inside Rusty's mother was. But thankfully, this has a happy ending with Rusty's father carrying his son to safety. But one thing that is worth noting is that the mother is still out there running free. Next, we move over to part 2 of the comic and we see a soldier looking at a picture of some of the dogs that have gone missing, starting with Bandit, then Radley, but then we see Frisky, and you can tell that something is off with her just by looking at her eyes. But it seems like she was able to send out a message to the military asking for help. And now that the soldier, who happens to be Brandy, has arrived to rescue her, she transforms, and here's my concern. I wonder if she was already infected with the rage before she called the military, or if it got into her after. Because it will be much harder to deal with these creatures if they have enough intelligence to trick other dogs and lure them into traps like this. Now thankfully, Brandy is able to fight her off before she can attack her, using some kind of zap gun. And I think what's even more important here is that Brandy learns that Frisky had eaten some of those red berries, which I think is safe to confirm now that those berries are what is causing this rage to invade some of these dogs. Although at this point, we still don't know what they were talking about in terms of that smoke that they were telling people to watch out for. Now, the next scene caught me off guard because we see Chili pointing a gun at her own sister, but she is unable to actually pull the trigger. And while I was confused at first, it seems like Brandy may be the one responsible for the rage. and now she may have a way to stop it. But I find it interesting that she says some scars will remain, which is actually a very realistic way to think about it, especially when you consider that even if they stop this virus, at this point so much damage has already been done that there will surely be some lingering scars. I mean, some of these dogs ate their own puppies, for God's sake. But having no real other options, we see that Chili agrees to work with her sister, who has already come up with a possible serum. We also get a flashback of when Brandy first came across the berries and her first feral dog. And I have to admit, the calmness that they convey at first sight is the creepiest thing about them. Now, Brandy wasn't taking any chances out in the woods alone, so when she saw this weird looking dog, she immediately took a shot at it and hit them right in the stomach. But this is when she makes another terrifying discovery. Apparently, when dogs eat the berries, their pain nerves go numb, which just means that they feel no pain. So just like with regular zombies, the best way to probably deal with them is likely to just shoot them in the head, but I suppose that the heart would also work if you have good aim. And then after that, we see Brandy runs off with the dog in the background, seemingly completely unaffected by the gunshot. But more importantly, we learn that Brandy calls the berries her product, which means that these berries are man-made, or, well, dog-made, and have some very dangerous side effects. Now, after seeing what the berries did to that dog, Brandy started to run experiments to see what was actually causing the animals to go feral. And what she found was that there's a chemical inside of the berries that make creatures go into madness, but it also releases a type of gas that makes dogs hallucinate. But for some reason, it doesn't affect the children. It seems like the children are still too young and innocent, or as it's described in the comics, they still have a light behind their eyes, so they're able to resist the effect of the hallucinations. So if I understand it, when the adults see the infected dogs looking large and disfigured, this could be because of the gas. Whereas the children always see the affected dogs as normal, which is why in the beginning of the comic, Bluey didn't see anything wrong with her Uncle Rat, while Chili, on the other hand, was freaking out. And this is actually super dangerous for the children because they are going to have a hard time trying to tell who they can trust and who is actually feral. Luckily, it seems like Brandy was able to alter the berries, and now she just needs her sister to help her cure the sick dogs. And it's a good thing that Chili agrees, because right after that, we see a bunch of military dogs pull up, ready to put her down, because they thought that she was going to shoot Brandy. But now that the sisters are on the same team again, the military can start doing something that they call Code Green. After that, we move over to this scene where Bluey's crew is able to meet up with the other survivors, and there's this joyous reunion until someone asks where Snickers is, causing Bluey to have flashbacks to his last moments and then walking away so that she can be alone. But luckily, her mother is there to help her through this moment, sitting and speaking with her and even sharing her own grief of losing her own mother, and of course, Bandit. She also delivers a heartbreaking line when she says, "It's hard losing someone you love, Bluey. But your pain will always be in the back of your head because they gave you so many good memories." And honestly, I wasn't expecting such a heartfelt message from a horror AU. Now, we see the scene end with Bluey picking up this flower and letting it float away in the wind as kind of a tribute to her lost friend, Snickers. After that, we see that Uncle Stripe is making a full recovery, and that did make me happy because he was holding it down in this AU. But the happy moment is pretty short-lived because Brandy comes and tells Chili that she's ready for her. This causes Chili to give Trixie a hug and tell her that she's leaving her daughters in her hands. But after some pleading from Bluey, she is convinced to allow the girls to come with her to retrieve their father, which I think is a terrible idea, but maybe everything will work out. Next, we see this little terrier confirm that they are going to go test this new serum on Bandit, and if it works on him, they'll use it to try and cure all the other dogs as well. This chapter ends with Brandy telling Chili that if for whatever reason the serum doesn't work, they will have to take Bandit out. And judging by how vicious he looks here, I don't doubt it. And before the video cuts out, we also hear this. And I like how the third chapter begins the same way that the second chapter ends. Now at this point, Chili and Brandy have made it back to the house where Bandit is, and they have a gun that is able to shoot the serum into him. But they also have a real gun just in case things go south. And when they first enter the house, they can't see any signs of him. And even as they look around, it is starting to be clear that he may have jumped out of a window and is just out running around. But just when they're ready to give up, Chili catches a reflection in a mirror and she sees that Bandit is right behind her sister, ready to attack. But Chili quickly slams into her sister and knocks her out of the way. But in the process, she breaks both of their masks, meaning that they are now susceptible to the gas, which may be why Bandit looks so scary here. We also see that Brandy loses her serum gun in the fall, and knowing that this may be the only chance that she has to save her husband, Chili fights him, acting as a distraction while her sister finds the serum. And while it looks like Chili knocked Bandit out, he was actually just waiting for her to drop her guard so that he could get her with a sneak attack. And we see that Bandit is able to throw Chili into another room and momentarily knocks her out, making it a 1v1 fight between him and Brandy. But after a little bit, we do see that Chili wakes up and shoots her way out of this new room. But while this was happening, Brandy was running for her life and is eventually cornered by Bandit. But before he can attack her, we get this scene here. Now, at the end of that cutscene, it seems like Bandit was able to recognize who Brandy was for a moment. But before we move on to how Chili came in clutch and saved her sister, let me show you what the versions of Bluey and Chili were saying in Bandit's mind.
Accept it as your memories fade away and the horrific versions consume you bit by bit. As the face of the past fades around you, slowly making you feel nothing at all. The agony slowly consuming you, always so near.
Now, back in the comic, we see that Chili is able to distract Bandit again, but is promptly knocked down. But this was all a part of the plan, because Chili bought Brandy just enough time to find the serum gun and fire it into Bandit. And then we see this scene where it looks like Bandit is literally throwing up blood, but it's likely just all the rage leaving his body. We also see this manifestation of his rage pop up, and it starts to reveal what we expected all along. This rage virus basically causes dogs to go feral outwardly, but inside they're still their regular selves. So they are basically being forced to watch as they commit terrible acts to their own family and friends, and they are powerless to do anything about it. But after getting the serum shot into his body, we learn that Bandit is now in control again. But more importantly, we learn that the rage was Bandit all along, meaning that the berries don't create something new, but simply amplify the rage that is already within us, showing that under the right, or I suppose the wrong circumstances, we all can become monsters and do horrendous acts. But finally, Bandit wakes up and he is back to normal and is able to go and actually hug his girls again. And I like that this comic kind of came full circle, because it started with Chili having to run away with her girls because Bandit was trying to hug them, right? Which is actually him trying to kill them. And now it kind of ends with him actually being able to hug his family again. And I also like that now that he has the serum inside of him, the world is kind of back into color, kind of showing that this antidote has brought hope and light back into this world. We also get a little montage of all the other infected people coming back to their families, and they're all cured and in relatively good condition. And we also get this little scene after the credit that shows the future of this AU. We see Bluey walking with her child and they come across those red berries. And Bluey has to yell at him not to touch them, explaining that they are very dangerous. And for people wondering why they didn't just destroy the berries, it would likely be impossible or very hard to destroy them all, just by the nature of how berries grow and how easily they are to spread around. Anybody that lives around a blackberry thicket knows this for sure. But also just think about how many poisonous berries are just in the US alone, even right now in 2025. It's probably easier just to educate the population to not deal with them than to try to burn them all away. But with that being said, this comic was very well done, and I like that they didn't go with the standard type of infection. This idea felt fresh, and it had me on the edge of my seat reading it. Make sure to recommend more in the comments, and I'll be sure to go ahead and get to them as soon as I can. Thank you for watching. As always, check out this video next, and we'll see you next time. Peace, peace.